Good morning. I see we still have people trickling in, so just give everyone a couple minutes before getting started. All right, go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Invasive Species Action Fund Budgets and In-Kind Support webinar. My name is Madeline Schuster. I'm the Communications and Administration Coordinator at the Invasive Species Center, and I'll be your moderator today. You'll have the opportunity to ask our speaker, Kendra Jolly, the Partnership and Grants Coordinator at the ISC, any questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to ask questions in the chat during the presentation, and I'll do my best to answer them. At the end of the presentation, please put any questions into the Q&A. It'll just make it a lot easier for me to review them and pose them to Kendra. Thank you so much for joining us. Now I'll pass it over to Kendra.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Madeline. I appreciate your help this morning. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Like Madeline mentioned, this is going to be our Invasive Species Action Fund webinar to go over some budgeting and in-kind guidance for your projects. Hopefully, you're able to see my screen okay. Again, perfect. Thank you. I am going to be going off camera to deliver the presentation. I just find it helps with the quality. And then both Madeline and myself will come back on camera and go over any questions that we do have. So we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so again, thank you everyone for joining us for the ISAF In-Kind and Budgeting webinar. As a reminder, applications for the Invasive Species Action Fund are currently open through Good Grants. The link to that is isc.grantplatform.com. Applications will be closing on January 9th of 2026, so there's lots of time to get those great projects coming in. So for a bit of a reminder, the Invasive Species Action Fund is a grant program designed to facilitate on-the-ground management and monitoring of invasive species in Ontario. The program is funded by the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, and we are very grateful for their continued support. Hopefully you did catch our webinar last week where we did provide a general overview of the fund. If not, the recording will be posted to the ISC YouTube page in the coming days. You can always check there for a refresher or to go over anything. All of the information that we did go over last week is also found on the applicant guide, which is also a valuable resource as you are working on your project applications. Through ISAF, we always strive for continuous improvement for our granting programs each cycle, and we welcome feedback from applicants and recipients. As a result of this feedback, we understand that there are some organizations or individuals who aren't as familiar with grant writing or building a budget for the grants or how to assess in-kind contributions. So as a result of that, we did create today's webinar to provide some additional guidance and hopefully better that understanding to build out those budgets and those projects. So the purpose of your budget does really help our reviewers, understand the essence of your proposal. In a lot of ways, it's one of the most important opportunities for you to lay out your plan to the reviewers. The review teams do score submissions based on how realistic the submitted budgets are. They're not looking at how expensive your project is. They're not looking at how inexpensive your project is. What they're looking at is the budget that you have put together realistic to the project plans that you are proposing. So projects that are requesting fewer resources than they ultimately need may have an increased risk of failing to reach completion because they didn't ask for enough. There's a misconception that maybe if I ask for a lower value than I actually need, I'm more likely to get funded. That's not the case. On the flip side of that, projects that are requesting more resources than they really need may also be seen as inappropriate. So when you're building out your budget, ask for what you realistically need to be successful in your project. Don't try and undercut yourself, and don't try to, overfund to give you a bit of a buffer. We want to look at what is actually required. And a good tip from some of our past reviewers is really do your best to make reasonable judgments. And if in doubt, provide additional rationale. And we're going to take a look at the budget template that will be available. And there is a cell in the Excel file where you can put comments in and help further explain that budget should you need to. So when we're developing a budget, all applicants are required to complete the budget table, which is going to identify the overall project budget, funds that are requested through ISAF, any non-ISAF contributions, and that can be both through cash or in-kind contributions. So those things that are made by the applicants, other project partners, and or other funders. I mentioned this last week and we'll talk about it again. When we're looking at cash or in kind, we do not weight one as having more value than the other. So if one organization is able to contribute $5,000 in cash towards their project, and another organization is able to contribute, $2,000 for their project through volunteer time, one is not going to get weighted over the other as being more valuable. So we are also going to ask that you do indicate the source of any in-kind contributions and the corresponding cell of the budget table. And like I mentioned, we'll look at that a little bit later on. So we also provide applicants with budget categories to help develop your project out. These are going to include salaries and human resources, travel and accommodations, professional services, equipment supplies purchase, equipment and supplies rental, communications, administration. And please note, we do have a hard cap of 10% of the total award on administration fees. So if you do exceed that 10%, there may be conversations had in order to reduce that to the 10% level if your project is successful. Or there is the potential to add in any other categories that you feel may be required for your project. You have the opportunity to do that as well. We would also like to note that some budget categories may have multiple lines, and we'll also break those down in the coming slides. So where we may see multiple budget lines is maybe salary and human resources. Maybe part of the funding request is going towards a staff member already on salary, and then maybe you're having a summer student coming in. So you're going to want to break those two different lines down. And we're also going to go through kind of what falls under each of these categories as we move through today as well. So explaining these categories, when we're looking at salaries and human resources, this can include wages and mandatory benefits for staff that are going to be directly involved in the implementation of the project. This can include wages for the project managers that are directly involved in the implementation, if there's any project oversight, supervision, and work in accounting are excluded from eligible staff costs. This cycle, we are strongly encouraging applicants to seek out additional funding towards salary costs where applicable, such as the Canada Summer Jobs Program. So if you have an eligible position that would fall under Canada Summer Jobs, we are asking that applicants do look into those other sources of funding to help us, kind of bolster our program and fund as many projects as possible. So if you do have that opportunity, we would, recommend that you do take that opportunity. And if you are successful with Canada Summer Jobs, that then becomes an in-kind contribution, which also helps bolster your project as well. Professional services. This is going to include third-party costs, such as a contractor that's hired to manage plants, aquatic and forest invasives, or a consultant hired to complete a survey. So this does cover quite a large array of different contractors. Maybe it's somebody that's coming in to apply herbicide for you. Maybe it's somebody that you are contracting to map an area that maybe you need drones to do and you don't have access to drones, or the permits necessary. So any sort of professional services are going to be applicable under an ISAF funding request. Equipment and supplies purchased. This is going to include materials and supplies purchased for the implementation of your project. The cost of any purchase over $1,000 must be prorated to the duration of the project timeframe. So what that means is that if you are purchasing a large piece of equipment that you're using for June, July, August, September, but then your organization will be keeping past the time frame, you will need to prorate that to the 4 months of use, not the full cost. Equipment, supplies, and rental. This is going to include any materials and supplies that were rented for the implementation of the project. So whether that is a rental vehicle, a trailer, equipment, all of those are going to be eligible funding request expenses through the Invasive Species Action Fund. Travel and accommodation. Now for this one, it can include transportation for meetings or events for project staff, contractors, or meeting and event attendees, depending on kind of location and the numbers that we're looking at. We do ask that all funding amounts align with the Ontario government's Meal and Hospitality Expense Directive. So for example, any mileage that is less than 4,000 kilometers over the course of the project, the mileage rate is 40 cents per kilometer for Southern Ontario, and then 41 cents per kilometer for Northern Ontario. When you're looking at booking accommodations, if this is going to be a category that you are requesting funding through, we do ask that you include appropriate or economical accommodations for those meetings or events, for those project staff, contractors, attendees. Look at the rooms that are available, book what you need, as opposed to the high-end suites that may be available. So we do look at that for economical accommodations. Same with any sort of vehicle rentals. You're renting what is needed for the project. We're not doing a super large upgrade just because we can, because we're trying to get funding for it. Food and beverage can also be included, and this may include costs for food or beverages for the staff or contractors and those meetings or events that are held with the public. It is important that we do retain receipts to verify expenditures where required. Funds that are requested under the travel and accommodation cannot be used for non-meal food and beverages or alcohol. Any meals when the travel period is less than 5 hours total, or any meals during travel where it is a regular part of the job duties of that staff member or contractor. Looking at communications. So for communications, any requests for funding under this category do need to be used to communicate about the ISAF project, not to be used for expenses where the primary function is going to support education and outreach. So what we mean by this is if you are, putting funding towards signage, maybe noting that you're doing work in the park, signage for use of herbicides, for knowledge. It's not where we're going out and, having large meetings to educate on the specific invasive itself. It has to be to communicate the project. So it could be through press, it could be through ads that maybe you're putting funds toward on social media, things like that. ISAF funding would be well spent if allocated to support communication needs that increase on the ground impact. So if you're looking to pull in more volunteers, that would be an allowable funding request or expense through ISAF. Looking at administration expenses. So like we mentioned, administration expenses are not to exceed a maximum of 10% of the total ISAF funding. Admin expenses are going to include costs that are part of the normal operation of an applicant's organization, but that can be reasonably attributed to the project as well. They can include expenses such as disbursements, like postage, courier charges, photocopying charges, office supplies, any bank fees that are incurred during the course of the project. You're also able to look at things such as if you're renting space to hold any meetings or having to get space for workshops, that sort of thing. That's all going to be included. Funds may not be used for avoidable financial institution service fees. So for example, if you have a not sufficient funds charge, ISAF cannot be used to reimburse that charge. So for clarity, administration expenses do not include items such as salary and wages, rent, travel accommodations, meal expenses, computers, legal fees, audit fees, engineering fees, or any other professional fees. If these items are required, please include them as a separate line item in your budget. It is not something that would fall under administration. Again, that's just for administering the project itself. Moving on from the budget categories, we're now going to start looking at in-kind contributions. So the Invasive Species Action Fund does have a requirement of at least a 1-to-1 matching contribution towards your project. So if you are requesting $3,000 in Invasive Species Action Fund funding, the expectation is that your project will have an overall budget of at least $6,000. It can exceed that, showing that 1-to-1. Whether that comes through in cash or in kind, it's whatever works for your organization and whatever your project is going to allow for. I will note for any projects that are looking at doing a federally regulated species, specifically forest pests, there is going to be a strong preference for additional sources of funding for those projects to exceed the 1-to-1. And applicants with projects focused on federally regulated pests are encouraged to seek out that additional funding. Because it is a federally regulated pest, we would like to see additional federal funding if possible to exceed that 1-to-1. When we're looking at eligible or in-kind contributions, this can include monetary and non-monetary resources that partners, sponsoring organizations, or the applicant's organization are going to provide to help support the project itself. In the budget table, again, we're going to look at that here a little bit shortly. We do ask applicants to clarify what contributions are reported as cash and which contributions are donated as in kind. But again, both are going to be weighted equally throughout the project assessment. And we do have columns in the budget table specifically for cash and specifically for in kind. So it's easy to separate out the two of them. Applicants are also asked to indicate if any of the in-kind contributions have not yet been secured in the budget table, with a brief indication as to the status of securing that contribution. So if you have been told by an organization that, yes, we're going to donate, $1,000 included in the budget, but maybe just have a note that, they've told us we're going to be receiving it. It's just not fully finalized yet, or we're waiting for the agreement. Whatever the case might be. So looking at types of in-kind contributions, we've got the following categories available to you for consideration of in-kind contributions. So we can have jobs, so managers, coordinators, technicians, administration. Anybody who is working on the project can be considered as an in-kind contribution for the jobs. Contractors, so licensed invasive species removal specialists, if they're donating their time, if they're donating product, they're donating machinery, whatever the case might be, you can include that as an in-kind contribution to your project. Volunteers, so their hours of hard work do absolutely count. Equipment, if you've got equipment on hand that you'll be using for the project, you can include that as part of your in-kind contributions. So again, office supplies, specialized machinery, PPE, vehicles that you may have as part of your organization, all of that can be included as an in-kind contribution. Any professional services, Maybe the organization is paying for these services already, but part of that service is going to be focused on your project. You can include those fees as in-kind contributions in your table as well. And then any other costs that we might have as well. So disposals, permits, postage, all of those items. If you have equipment on hand that you will be using, we do ask that you use kind of an appreciated value for it. So if it wasn't purchased specifically for this project, but will be utilized as part of your project, try to appreciate that value. Some guidance that we have been giving out is to take a look at what the rental costs would be if you were to rent that same piece of equipment for that duration of time, and kind of use that as a guide for determining how much you could get or put towards your in-kind for that item. So going through these a little bit more in depth. So for salaries and human resources, any actual salary or wage costs, including MERCs, so those mandatory employment related costs, for people that are paid for their contributions to the project. This can include project managers, admin staff, or any others contributing. Any costs that are paid out directly by the group or organization that may come from other sources, such as cash contributions. So these can all be included. We just wouldn't want to include salary funding that's received through ISAF in this part of your budget. Looking at the professional and technical services or contracts, so consulting fees and or technical expertise directly related to the funded project. So again, communications, professionals, lawyers, Indigenous elders, that'll be paid out directly by the group or the organization, not through ISAF funding. So again, if this is something that your organization is taking on separately that you're not requesting funding for, you can include that as an in-kind contribution for your project. Talking about volunteer hours, the way that we like to kind of attribute a value to the volunteer hour is to look at somebody who would be doing a similar duty to what the volunteers were doing. So any hours of time that the volunteers are going to contribute towards the project, performing that same or similar duty to a current employee, or if you find like a median or kind of a general amount for that specific role. So for example, if we have one employee who makes $20 an hour completing manual removal of an invasive plant, if we then have 10 volunteers, each donating 5 hours of their time to also complete manual removals, we would then have $20 an hour at 50 volunteer hours. That would then give you that $1,000 of in-kind contribution through volunteer hours. So again, if you don't have somebody on staff doing the same thing, if we're able to find an average value through job postings or anything else that you're looking at to value those hours, we just ask that you be reasonable when making those sort of determinations. Travel and subsistence costs. So reasonable out-of-pocket travel and subsistence expenses for work that are directly dedicated to the funded project and paid out by the group or organization. So again, any expenses that you're paying out as part of the project, you can include as an in-kind contribution, as long as it's not also falling into the funding request category. Equipment, materials, and supplies. So any cost of purchased or donated new and used equipment, materials, or supplies, they can be factored into your in-kind contributions. If you're purchasing licenses needed for the project, if not already provided by the institution, or the development cost of new technologies related to the project and paid out, again, all of this can be included in your in-kind budgeting. We find a lot of organizations undervalue what they're bringing to the table for in-kind. So we're hopeful that by going through all of these, it will help you value your contributions and raise that budget that you are bringing to the table. Dissemination of results. So the preparation of materials, maybe digital material for mass and other audiences. Organization of a workshop, a seminar roundtable, public lectures. Again, if you are bringing that to the public, you're sharing your knowledge as part of your project. Again, you can use that as an in-kind contribution. The use of facilities, the typical cost of donated meeting rooms, space, or facilities for which a fee is usually charged or donated, additional office space. All of that, again, can be used as an in-kind contribution. So if you're having planning meetings and maybe they're off-site because somebody has donated, space in a cafe or space in a community building, ask them what the value of that space would be, include that in your budget. So now we're looking at an example budget that we've put together for a project. This is a completely fictitious project. The funds that are listed here do not actually exist. And I apologize, I see a couple of typos there that were not caught. So our first category here, we've got salaries and human resources. Here we're talking about a project coordinator to map and monitor giant hogweed across 4 municipal parks. The funding request is $500 through the Invasive Species Action Fund. And then we've got a matching contribution in cash of $700, and then an in-kind contribution of $1,250. And then we see under the sources of in-kind and cash contributions, there is the opportunity there to break down where these additional funds are coming from. So we've got 28 hours of staff time for $700. And then we've got an additional 50 hours at $25 an hour for that $1,250. And then on the right, we've got the overall project budget for that line item as $2,450. Now, keeping in mind, this is an example budget. You may have multiple lines under salaries and human resources, or maybe under professional services, and that is okay. You are welcome to have additional line items to give you more room to provide those details. Under travel and accommodations, there's mileage that is being covered by the applicant here. So they're providing $75.44 in matching cash contributions to pay for that mileage. We've got professional services. They've broken down here that they're bringing a contractor in to treat and remove that giant hogweed, includes staff time and equipment costs. Estimated daily rate for 1 day is $2,000. And that's requested fully through ISAF, no in-kind there, and that's just fine. We do not expect you to have an in-kind match for every single budget category. Just put it in where it is appropriate for your project and your organization. Equipment and supplies purchased. So they're purchasing mapping equipment and additional software licenses. So they've requested $130 through ISAF. It's not showing here, but that was for the software license. And then $1,200 they are contributing for 2 tablets that were purchased to use on this project. Equipment and supplies rental. So here we've got the trailer rental for plant material disposal valued at $80. They're going to contribute that themselves through the organization. And it looks like they got funding through another source, which is the Parks and Community Fund. Again, a fictitious example of a fund here for us. Communications, so printing temporary signage for public notification. So again, we mentioned under the professional services that they're going to treat the giant hogweed. So those signs would go to alert the public that there are an herbicide in use to do treatment. So they're aware to steer clear of the area temporarily. That is going to be provided by the applicant in this situation for $60. And then we have got our administration. So again, that hard cap at 10% to cover miscellaneous items, which is at $539.54, which brings our funding request total to $3,169.54. Matching contribution in cash of $855.44, in-kind contributions in through other sources are $2,510. That gives us an overall project budget of $6,534.98. And when looking at their cash and in-kind contributions, Their in-kind contribution is a total of $3,365.44, which puts this example budget just slightly over that one-to-one match. So if they were doing a one-to-one exactly, we would want to see in kind at $3,169.54. When you do submit your budget through the application, we do ask that you round to the nearest dollar with your final funding request. So please do keep that in mind as you're working through things. And then just to review how to access the budget file through Good Grants. When you log into Good Grants and start your application, you will see all of the tabs that we see here across the top of your screen. As a reminder, you do want to do the start here and the eligibility requirements first. Answer the eligibility requirements, ensure you're checking your eligibility. Otherwise, you may be spending time on an application that may not allow you to move through the remainder of the project if it is determined that your project is not eligible. And then we've got our applicant information, the project description, and then on the budget details tab, you will want to read through the information provided. And then we do have a link for the Excel file that you can download. When you first open it, it is a read-only file. You are not able to make any changes until you download the file locally to do the work in that specific file. We are also asking that you please rename the file to include either your application number, which you are given through Good Grants, or the name of your organization, just to help us keep them organized on our end. This is the budget file that you're going to see once you download it. Not going to spend a lot of time on it. You can see here we've got all those categories. We have got the additional details columns to provide the sources of in-kind contributions. And then where we're asking for the budget details themselves, that's going to be in that second column there under budget item, where you can really break down why you're asking for the funds or give those salary calculations or the contractor calculations. You are able to add more lines as necessary under each category. You're not restricted to one line, so please do add lines if needed. And then we just ask that you do make sure that they're totaled at the bottom and totaled accurately. It just makes things much easier on the reviewers as they're going through the review process for you. Once you're done, you'll remain on the budget details tab. As you scroll down the page, you will see this drag and drop box here. You can either drag and drop the budget directly into that box. It'll upload into Good Grants for you, or you can choose the select attachments button there, and that will allow you to browse through your computer to find the file location and upload it that way as well. We are asking that you do please include it on the budget details tab and not the supporting materials tab. Again, that just helps us keep things organized. All right, so that brings us to the end of the informational session on in-kind and budgeting. We are absolutely happy to field any general questions that you might have here via the Q&A function. If there are any questions that have not been asked or answered, or questions that you have later on in the process, please do review the applicant guide. A lot of those questions are answered in the applicant guide. If you find that it's something that is specific to your organization or to your project, something that's maybe unique and not in there, please do reach out to the grants team at grants@invasivespeciescenter.ca. So I'm going to go back on camera here and we can address any of those questions that we may have come in.
Thanks, Kendra. It looks like there's just a couple questions. Someone asks, what is Good Grants?
So Good Grants is the platform that we utilize to receive applications, to do any interim reporting, final reporting. It's a platform that we use to manage our grant process. Now, we've also talked a lot about Good Grants in our webinar from last week. So if it's something that's new to you, I would highly recommend checking out the YouTube video once it's posted. I would say it should be posted by the end of this week, and that'll give you some good access to it.
The Next question we have is asking for including mileage as an in-kind contribution, is it acceptable for the organizational pay? Is it acceptable if the organizational payment is based on a higher rate of mileage reimbursement than the provincial baseline of 60 cents per kilometer?
I would have to look into seeing if it has been updated, but we would like to stick with the provincial guidelines.
Okay. We have someone asking if you could briefly discuss how ISAF views and weighs the KPI section as part of your application reviews.
So it's a little bit off topic, but yes, we can chat about that briefly here. So with the key performance indicators, we really look at those to ensure that the project that you're describing is going to be realistic to the KPIs that are being managed. So we look at them to see what's projected to be delivered. And we do understand that when you're doing the application, these are all projections and that things change. So as long as the KPIs are realistic to the project itself, they're weighted kind of on that scale as opposed to whether or not we think you're actually going to be able to deliver what you're saying you deliver. That might be a bit of a general answer and maybe not quite what you're looking for. But if you have a specific question on a specific KPI, you're welcome to reach out to us and maybe we can address that a little bit better for you.
Someone asks, is there a preference between hiring contractors for chemical control or providing training for licensing or certification for that control to be done in-house?
It really depends on the organization. We would love to see capacity building, and that's how we see it if you are doing it in-house. So you can request funding through ISAF to get a license for somebody on staff, to get training for somebody on staff, and then it builds that capacity, which we love to see because not only are you going to utilize that for your ISAF project, but you can utilize that for future years as well. If your organization is just not in a position to be able to train somebody on staff, absolutely get a contractor. We don't weight one any higher than the other, but we do love to see that capacity building where at all possible.
All right, those are all the questions we have at the moment. Can give it a couple more seconds for any last minute questions, but otherwise feel free to reach out to grants@invasivespeciescenter.ca for any additional questions.
Right, excellent. Thanks so much, Madeline, for your help this morning. I very much appreciate it. And thank you all for attending. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Oh, wait, did one more just pop in?
Um, I see. Oh, someone asks, what is the pot size for each stream? Um,
Yeah, so our funding streams, we've got micro grants. That is a cap of up to $3,500. We've got our accelerated impact funding, which is a cap of $15,000. And then we've got our transformative action fund, which is a cap of $50,000. So any dollar value within those streams, you're welcome to apply to with those funding caps.
I think that is all for questions.
All right, well, thanks again, everyone. Enjoy your day, and we look forward to receiving your applications.